Scott Travis isn't a name most people remember. But without him, Judas Priest might have died in 1990. When the band stood on the brink of collapse, an unknown drummer from Virginia walked in, sat behind the kit, and unleashed a pedal strike that made the entire studio fall silent. Painkiller was born. Not just a song, but a resurrection. Yet few know that behind that moment lay nearly 2 decades of struggle. A youth marked by poverty, nights spent in damp Los Angeles rooms, forgotten gigs, and a desperate hunger to be heard in a world that only listened to the famous. Scott once stood outside a parking lot, clutching a cassette tape of his drumming, hoping Judas Priest would somehow hear it. 10 years later, he became their heartbeat. Amid screaming riffs and blazing lights, Scott Travis chose silence, letting his drums speak for him. A man who never sought the spotlight, yet became the one who kept Judas Priest from falling apart. To truly understand his journey, we must turn back the clock. To the years when everything was still in shadow, when a young man had no idea he would become the legend behind the mighty engine of Judas Priest. Before Scott Travis's pedal kicks became Judas Priest's signature, before he ever touched a drum kit, nothing in his life hinted that a legend was in the making. Unlike most heavy metal icons, Scott didn't grow up on the noisy streets of Los Angeles or in the birthplace of rock drumming greats. He was born on September 6, 1961, in Norfolk, Virginia, a quiet port city where life moved at the pace of the tides, carried by the smell of salt water, the sound of ship horns, and the steady rhythm of dock workers' days. His father, a ship repairman, spent long hours in cold, oil-stained engine rooms, while his mother, a quiet yet strong-willed bookkeeper at a local shop, believed more in discipline and hard work than in dreams. The family wasn't rich, but they weren't struggling either. Just an ordinary American household of the 1960s, practical, conservative, and far removed from the world of art. There were no instruments at home, only a small radio on the kitchen shelf. Yet that radio became a portal to another world for the youngest son, the boy who would one day make the world hear his drums. Scott had an older brother who followed the expected path, joining the Navy like many men in Norfolk. But the younger one was different. Quiet, dreamy, Scott would sit for hours by the radio, tuning in to late-night rock shows from local stations. Whenever the drums of John Bonham or Ian Pace thundered through the speakers, he'd tap along on his desk, the door, or any surface that made a sound. At school, Scott wasn't remarkable. Teachers described him as calm but unfocused, the kind of kid who doodled drum notations in his math notebook. He wasn't the loud rebel type. His rebellion lived inside him, in the belief that he wouldn't live the same life as his parents. He wanted to be heard, to create a sound that was his own. At 14, after endless pleading, his parents scraped together enough to buy him a second-hand drum kit, chipped paint, worn-out skins. But to Scott, it was treasure. He once said that the first time he touched the drum, he didn't play. He just laid his hand on it and felt his heartbeat sync with it. Music didn't come to him through lessons, but through the curiosity and patience of a boy trying to understand himself. By his late teens, Scott was playing in school bands and performing in small bars around the Hampton Roads area. There were no bright lights, no roaring crowds, just a few drunk patrons. But to Scott, that was a world of its own. For the first time, he felt like he belonged somewhere, where even silence had a sound. One memory stayed with him forever. After a Judas Priest concert at the Hampton Coliseum in the late 1970s, a not-yet 20 Scott stood for hours in the parking lot, clutching a cassette tape of his drumming, hoping the band would hear it. No one came out. No one listened. But the dream didn't die. It stayed smoldering, waiting for the right wind to ignite. And that quiet dream is what made him leave Norfolk. A peaceful place never meant for those who wanted to make thunder. He knew that if he stayed, he'd become just another worker like his father, a name no one remembered. But if he left, even if he failed, at least he'd know he had knocked on fate's door. And that door, no matter how tightly shut, was destined to echo one day with the first drumbeat of Scott Travis. By the late 1970s, Virginia had become too small for the dream, growing inside Scott Travis. The small bars and repetitive local gigs made him realize that if he stayed, his life would forever be confined to playing for a few dozen drunk patrons. So Scott made a choice: to leave the quiet land of safety behind and head for Los Angeles, the blazing center of the rock world. But LA in the early 1980s was no paradise for dreamers. Beneath the neon glow of the Sunset Strip was a real battlefield where thousands of drummers fought for the smallest chance. Scott rented a shabby room on the outskirts, just enough space for his drum kit and an old mattress. Many nights he had to choose between eating dinner or saving money to replace broken drumsticks, and he always chose the drums. Sweat, loneliness, the smell of mold, and the constant noise of bands rehearsing downstairs became the harsh rhythm that forged his endurance, something no one could ever replace later. There were times Scott wanted to give up, to go back to Norfolk where life was easier. But whenever exhaustion hit, he remembered the Hampton Coliseum, where a boy once stood in the wind clutching a cassette tape, waiting for Judas Priest to walk out. That feeling, somewhere between despair and desire, became the only fuel that kept him moving forward. Then, opportunity arrived unexpectedly. As American metal began to rise, a young guitarist named Paul Gilbert was looking for a drummer who could match his insane speed in his new band, Racer X. Scott auditioned, bringing with him the double bass technique he had honed with blood and discipline. When he finished playing, the room went silent for a few seconds. Not out of doubt, but out of shock. They had found the man who could turn speed into an organized art form. Joining Racer X, Scott Travis didn't just find a gig, he found a home. In a band where every musician played at the edge of human limits, Scott became the anchor. Paul Gilbert unleashed blistering guitar runs. Bruce Boulay and Jeff Martin weaved riffs atop riffs. But only Scott's drumming kept the machine from exploding. He didn't just play the drums, he commanded them. When Street Lethal, 1986, was released, the underground press immediately noticed something different. Every double bass burst from Scott hit like gunfire, relentless and precise to an almost unreal degree. Yet beneath that technical mastery was emotion, the reason his drumming never sounded mechanical, but alive. In Blowing Up the Radio, he didn't just keep time for Gilbert's solos. He stretched the entire song taut like a string about to snap. And in Into the Night, he showed his restraint, pulling back the tempo to give space for the vocals, a feel only a true musician possesses. By Second Heat, 1987, Scott had stepped beyond being just the band's timekeeper. He was now leading the charge. Tracks like Scarified and Hammer Away were his personal manifestos, proof that speed and control could coexist. In Scarified, he pushed the double pedal to near impossibility without missing a beat. In Hammer Away, every snare hit landed exactly as the guitars shifted chords, giving the impression that the drums were pulling the entire band forward. Young drummers at the time recorded Scott's performances just to study how his feet moved, unable to believe a human could play that fast. Yet, technical brilliance didn't translate to commercial success. Racer X was praised by Guitar World and Drum magazine as the most technically perfect band of the decade, but ignored by radio. The MTV era favored pretty faces and catchy hooks. Racer X was too complex, too fierce, too uncompromising. They became a cult band, worshipped by musicians and insiders, invisible to the mainstream. For Scott Travis, it was a bittersweet glory. He was proud to play the music he loved, but every time he looked out at a few hundred loyal fans, he knew his journey wasn't finished. Beneath the thunder of his drums burned a quiet hunger. To be heard on a record so powerful, the world would have to stop and listen. And that dream had a name: Judas Priest. As the 1980s drew to a close, the final chance appeared. Dave Holland left Judas Priest, and the band was searching for a new drummer to define their next era. Among the long list of candidates was a name once found, standing outside the gates of Hampton Coliseum: Scott Travis. He didn't know it yet, but after one kick of the pedal, the dream of his youth would become destiny. And neither Judas Priest nor the world of heavy metal would ever be the same again. By the late 1980s, Judas Priest stood at a crossroads between survival and collapse. After nearly 2 decades of dominance, the band, once hailed as the godfathers of heavy metal, began to lose momentum amid the rise of thrash, a new generation led by Metallica, Megadeth, and Slayer, who played faster, louder, and more ferociously than ever before. Their longtime drummer Dave Holland, who had anchored the band since British Steel, 1980, left, leaving behind a void that felt impossible to fill. The band needed new blood, a heartbeat strong enough to pump life back into a machine that was beginning to stall. And among dozens of established British drummers auditioning for the spot, there was only one American on the list: Scott Travis. On the day of his audition, Scott arrived in silence. No speeches, no swagger, no need to prove anything. He simply sat down, adjusted the pedals, and let the drums speak for him. The first kick landed, solid, thick, and precise. And the room fell silent. Rob Halford turned to Glenn Tipton, and with a single glance, they both knew. They had just found Judas Priest's new engine. Not long after, the band flew to southern France to record their next album at Studio Miraval, a place where countless legends had sought inspiration. During one warm-up jam, Scott began to play a double bass pattern, gradually accelerating until it sounded like a jet engine taking off. Producer Chris Tsangarides stopped the session and said, "Keep that." That spontaneous moment became the immortal opening of Painkiller, an intro that would change the course of heavy metal history. When Painkiller was released in September 1990, the world was stunned. From the very first second, Scott Travis's drumming hit like a bomb dropped into the decade, fierce, surgical, yet bursting with emotion. Music outlets like AllMusic and Metal Archives hailed him as a precision machine. A machine with a soul. With that debut, Scott didn't just join Judas Priest, he resurrected them. Painkiller ushered metal into a new era. Double the speed, Halford's vocals soaring higher than ever, and Scott's drums pounding like artillery fire. Songs such as Leather Rebel, Between the Hammer and the Anvil, and Hell Patrol bore his unmistakable imprint, where the drums didn't just keep time, they drove the emotion, pushing the band to its limits. No longer the man behind the kit, Scott had become part of Judas Priest's very soul. After the album's release, the band didn't rest. The Painkiller World Tour, 1990-1991, was proof of their rebirth. Over 120 shows across the globe, from the US to Japan, South America to Europe. Each night was a full-scale metal assault. Rob Halford riding his Harley-Davidson onto the stage, Glenn Tipton and KK Downing unleashing riffs like thunder, and Scott Travis in the back, cold, steady, the mechanical heart keeping the machine from tearing itself apart. During the tour, they recorded several live tracks that would later appear on the compilation Metalworks 1973-1993, released in 1993. It wasn't just a retrospective, it was evidence of the band's renewed power. Judas Priest was faster, heavier, and tighter than ever thanks to Scott. Live versions of Painkiller, Hell-Bent for Leather, and Victim of Changes hit with such ferocity that even longtime fans admitted, they're not the Judas Priest of the 80s anymore. This is a new generation of the band. But amid that triumph, a shadow began to fall. In 1991, Judas Priest became embroiled in one of the most shocking lawsuits in music history. Two teenagers in Nevada had taken their own lives, and their families accused the band, claiming that Better by You, Better Than Me contained subliminal messages encouraging suicide. The entire group was summoned to court, including Scott, who had joined less than 2 years earlier. They were interrogated over every lyric, every album cover, hounded by the press daily. Though ultimately acquitted, the emotional damage was deep. For Scott, it was his first lesson in the dark side of fame, where music could be twisted into evidence and artists judged like criminals. After the trial, Judas Priest continued touring, but internal cracks began to show. Rob Halford wanted to evolve, experimenting with industrial and speed metal influences, while Glenn Tipton and K.K. Downing preferred to preserve the band's traditional sound. Scott, the youngest member, stood in the middle, torn between respect for his mentors and his own hunger for innovation. No new studio album emerged between 1991 and 1992. Painkiller was still echoing across the world, and the band was physically and emotionally drained after the tour and the courtroom ordeal. Yet Scott kept practicing and recording demos with Halford, tracks that would later form the backbone of Halford's side project Fight, 1993. Though his name wasn't officially credited, many insiders believed the spirit of Painkiller lived on in Fight, and that spirit was Scott Travis. In 1992, Judas Priest was truly shaken. After the Painkiller tour ended, Rob Halford announced his departure to pursue a solo path, a thunderbolt on a clear day. The band had lost its iconic voice, the media swarmed, and fans believed the golden era had come to an end. Amid the chaos, rumors began to spread that Scott Travis, the young drummer who had just helped resurrect the band, was also preparing to leave. But when asked, he didn't answer. He simply tapped his fingers on the table, steady and quiet. That gesture said enough. He wasn't leaving Judas Priest. And in that moment, the image of Scott Travis as the silent guardian was born, loyal, steadfast, and needing no defense. Yet destiny still pulled him toward Halford. When Judas Priest went on hiatus, Scott accepted Halford's invitation to join Fight, a new project the singer launched in 1993. With this band, he released War of Words, 1993, a bold and heavy groove, thrash record that bore little resemblance to Judas Priest. Here, Scott was no longer the savior. He was the experimenter. His drumming grew thicker, deeper, closer to the industrial sound that was dominating the era. Songs like Nailed to the Gun and Into the Pit showcased his adaptability, maintaining absolute precision, but trading sheer speed for weight and restraint, letting the drums become the backbone of Halford's fury. War of Words received critical acclaim as Halford's Rebirth album, and Travis was the one who kept it from descending into chaos. After 2 albums and an EP, Fight dissolved in 1995. Once again, Scott stood at a familiar crossroads: move on to something new or return to the past. But for him, Judas Priest was never just the past. It was where his heartbeat belonged. He quietly reconnected with Glenn Tipton and K.K. Downing. Throughout the years, the band spent searching for a new vocalist. By 2003, fate had come full circle. Rob Halford officially rejoined Judas Priest, and Scott, the man who had stood by through the dark years, was back behind his drums. The reunion wasn't just symbolic, it reaffirmed Scott Travis's loyalty, the only member who never turned his back, no matter how many times the band fractured. 2 years later came Angel of Retribution, 2005, an album hailed as a declaration of immortality. Scott played slower than on Painkiller, but every kick carried the weight of 2 decades of experience. Tracks like Judas Rising and Demonizer proved that if Painkiller was fire, Angel of Retribution was steel, forged and unbreakable. With Nostradamus, 2008, Judas Priest embarked on a new experiment at a symphonic concept album, ambitious and theatrical. Scott restrained his playing, trading aggression for storytelling, weaving his drums into the orchestral fabric so that each snare hit thundered like prophecy. By Redeemer of Souls, 2014, and Firepower, 2018, he had proven extraordinary endurance. More than 25 years after Painkiller, his feet still hadn't slowed. Firepower was even hailed as Judas Priest's strongest album in decades, reaching the top 5 on the Billboard 200, a rare feat for a veteran metal band. Then came Invincible Shield, 2024, recorded during the COVID-19 pandemic, with members working remotely and exchanging takes online. Yet, when the first drums hit, fans instantly recognized that familiar force. Scott Travis was still there, powerful, precise, unchanged since 1990. Critics praised him for creating an impenetrable wall of sound, while fans put it more simply, Scott doesn't age, he just gets heavier. 3 decades after Painkiller, Scott Travis still sits in the same place, behind the kit, beneath the burning lights and roaring metal. He doesn't play to prove anything, nor for fame. He plays because it's where he belongs. While his peers have retired, Scott continues to keep Judas Priest's heart beating, as if time itself can't wear down his legs. And every time that first pedal strike echoes, people remember, what keeps this band alive isn't just the glory of the past. It's the heartbeat of a man who never stopped believing in the music. Even while the brilliance of Painkiller still burned, Scott faced another test, not on stage, but in the hearts of fans. As the only American in an otherwise all-British band, he entered Judas Priest under skeptical eyes from both press and fans alike. Many saw him as an outsider, intruding on a pure British legacy. Scott understood, and instead of reacting, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He played. During his first rehearsal with the group, Glenn Tipton patted him on the shoulder and said softly, "Relax, mate. You're here to play with us, not to outplay us." That wasn't just encouragement. It was acceptance. Scott hadn't come to prove he was better than anyone. He'd come to make the machine run again, stronger than ever. But when Rob Halford left in 1992, the cracks in the fan base turned into a storm. At a 1997 concert in Germany, when the crowd began chanting, "Where's Halford?" over and over, Scott didn't respond with words. He responded with power. He hit harder, faster, until his pedal snapped in half, as if to scream that Judas Priest was still alive. The press pressed him relentlessly. "Are you leaving too?" He only smiled and said nothing. To the fans, that silence was a vow, to let the drums speak for him. And he kept that promise. When Halford returned in 2003, Scott said just one short sentence before their 2005 reunion show. "My drums will do the talking tonight." And they did. Every kick, every crash sounded like the salute of a soldier who had guarded the flame for 10 long years, waiting for the day of reunion. In 2020, during a rare podcast, Scott revealed that the legendary Painkiller intro had actually been a random warm-up before the official take, a spontaneous burst that became the thunderclap of a new metal era. That simple truth made the legend even more human, born not from calculation, but from an honest spark of emotion. The debate among fans has never stopped. Was Scott Travis the savior, or just the man who arrived at the right time? But time itself has answered. Painkiller didn't just save Judas Priest, it redefined heavy metal in the 1990s. And no matter how many debates continue, one thing is certain. No one but Scott Travis could have made those drums the eternal heartbeat of Judas Priest. On stage, Scott Travis is the fire that shakes entire arenas. But off stage, he is an almost eerily quiet presence. No one really knows anything about his private life. No wife, no children, no scandals, not even a clear answer to a personal question. In interviews, when asked about marriage, he usually smiles faintly and changes the subject, talking instead about drumming techniques or how to balance power between his legs when playing double pedal. That evasion isn't arrogance. It's as if he wants to keep for himself a part of life that belongs to silence, untouched by the noise of the world. Those who've met him in person say Scott is often the first to leave a party. While others laugh and talk, he quietly slips outside and sits alone beside his Harley Davidson. The lights reflect off the glossy black paint as he stares into the distance, a picture of freedom and solitude all at once. For Scott, the motorcycle isn't a mid-life hobby. It's a symbol of everything he's always pursued: speed, freedom, and absolute control amid chaos, the same way he lives and plays. More than once, fans have seen him ride alone to concerts. No bodyguards, no entourage. Just him and the roar of the engine cutting through the wind. Outside of music, Scott has a passion for American football. He says he loves the tension, the strategy, the impact of each play, because it reminds him of the intensity on stage when holding rhythm for a powerhouse like Judas Priest. To him, every kick of the pedal is like a tackle. It must be strong, precise, and never hesitant. But what his bandmates respect most isn't his speed or technique. It's his humility. He always insists that Judas Priest is a team, that no one is the center. "I'm just the guy keeping time for the real warriors," he once said simply at a press conference. And true to his word, for over 3 decades, he's stayed behind the kit, never chasing the spotlight, never needing his name printed larger than anyone else's. If there were one image to sum him up, it would be this. After the show, the silver-haired man sitting in the dark, removing his drum gloves, placing them gently on the seat, and gazing quietly at his Harley. Outside, the crowd is still cheering. Inside, only the steady breathing remains, of a man who has lived his whole life through sound and through the silence that follows it. In 2025, as many of his metal contemporaries have retired or stepped out of the spotlight, Scott Travis continues to live in the world he chose, where every night, his drums still thunder as if they've never aged. At 64, he remains the beating heart behind Judas Priest, still keeping time for a musical machine that has run for over half a century. Early in 2025, Judas Priest launched their European tour, Shield of Pain, a celebration of the 35th anniversary of Painkiller, the album that changed the face of heavy metal. On stage in Hamburg, Milan, Paris, and later Mexico City in May 2025, Scott Travis sat behind his familiar pearl drum kit, silver hair swaying, his feet moving with the same speed and precision that even young drummers admire. Each time the opening of Painkiller erupted, the crowd exploded, because it wasn't just an intro. It was living proof that time still hasn't defeated this man. During the tour, in an April 2025 interview with Blabbermouth, Scott confirmed that Judas Priest isn't stopping anytime soon. Following the success of Invincible Shield 2024, The band plans to begin a new album in 2026 with a direction that's heavier but also deeper. He spoke about the post-COVID creative process, how recordings were exchanged online, and said, "Distance can't kill music if the hearts still beat in sync." Beyond performing, Scott continues to work behind the scenes, helping with live production and testing new drum setups for the anniversary tour. In photos taken in Mexico City in May 2025, he still carries that same calm aura. A soft smile, drumsticks gripped firmly in his hands, eyes focused, seconds before the storm of sound begins. When people talk about Judas Priest, they usually mention Rob Halford, the voice of Thunder, or Glenn Tipton and KK Downing, the twin architects who forged the soul of heavy metal guitar. But if you listen closely, beneath the burning riffs and sky-piercing vocals, there's a steady pulse holding everything together, the drumming of Scott Travis. For more than 3 decades, he hasn't just kept time for Judas Priest. He's helped the band evolve. Painkiller wasn't merely a great album, it was a rebirth, a bridge connecting classic heavy metal to the modern era. Since then, every drummer who's ever picked up a pair of sticks in the world of metal carries traces of Scott Travis within them. The drummers of Slipknot, Dream Theater, Avenged Sevenfold, and Dragon Force, all of them owe something to that legendary double pedal attack where precision and emotion fuse into one. What makes Scott a legend isn't speed, it's precision and absolute control. He can lift an entire band into flight without missing a single beat. He doesn't show off or fight for the spotlight, yet Judas Priest could never record a song without him. It's a quiet kind of greatness, the kind that doesn't need lights, only a heartbeat. Scott Travis didn't invent heavy metal, but he made it young again. He's not a symbol of rebellion, but of discipline, a rare virtue in a world defined by chaos and freedom. Through generations of musicians who've come and gone, Scott remains behind the kit, playing every show as if it were his last. No trophies, no titles, no need to be called a hero. As long as that sound continues to echo, it's enough. Now, as Judas Priest enters its final era, Scott's drums still thunder through every live show, every album, every memory. To millions of fans, he isn't just the drummer of Judas Priest. He's the soul, the heartbeat of an entire generation of metalheads. And perhaps that is Scott Travis's greatest legacy. Not the legendary pedal strikes, but the endurance of a heart that never stopped beating for music. And if you ever find yourself listening to Painkiller late at night, close your eyes and let that opening drum roll sweep over you. Somewhere within that storm of sound, there's still a silver-haired man playing for the only reason he's ever known, for music, and for a heart that never stopped beating. If this story made you feel like you've just heard your youth echoing in those drums, share your thoughts in the comments. And don't forget to like and subscribe so we can keep revisiting the untold stories of legends who never stopped making noise.